Welcome to the Nuances podcast, where we expand our understanding of what it means to be part of the Asian diaspora. With every guest, we explore our often multi-hyphenated identities, our complicated relationships with our cultures, and how they affect everything from our career choices to our views on anti-racism, disability justice, religion, feminism, LGBTQ+ rights, and more. I'm your host, Lazu, a new American who grew up in the only place a dodo bird ever lived, Mauritius. We have a great conversation with comedian, writer, and producer Ed Pokropski today. If you enjoy that episode and you want to go to his show and you happen to be in Minneapolis this month, he is playing a show on Saturday, March 23rd. I will put the link in the show notes. Our guest today is Edward Yoo Pokropski. Ed is one of the executive producers of the Asian Comedy Fest and is an Emmy-nominated senior writer and producer at NBCUniversal. He is also a comedian touring his storytelling show, Case E04, adopted in the U.S.A. The show touches on how the media shapes our view and misconceptions about adoption. Ed, thank you so much for being on the Nuances podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this. Love doing podcasts. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Thank you. Now let's start from the beginning. Tell us where you grew up and what that was like as an Asian American.
Yeah, I mainly grew up in Philadelphia. I'm adopted, and I spent some time in California till I was about 5 years old with my mom and my brother, who's also adopted from a different family, and my dad at the time. And then they got a divorce, and then we moved to Philadelphia with my mom and me and my brother. I went to school there, went to high school. I went to college in Philly. And in the neighborhood that I grew up in, we went to Catholic school. And it was a blue collar white neighborhood that we were in predominantly. So that's what I knew. My mom was white and the neighborhood was white. And, you know, I'd like to say when I grew up and I finally could contextualize a lot of things, I felt like just a Philly kid some many days. But certainly the idea of not growing up around a lot of Asian and Asian American culture definitely had an impact on me. And I had to wrestle with identity for a long time. And especially now into adulthood. So growing up as an Asian American in Philly in that way certainly shaped a lot of what I address a lot as I got older.
Yeah. So you're an Emmy-nominated senior writer and producer at a major network. First off, congratulations. I'm sure that was not a walk in the park.
Oh, it was, you know, it's just happy. You're just happy to be nominated, as they say. No. You know, yes, I'm fortunate in that way to be where I'm at right now.
So how do you get into writing and comedy?
I went to school for film and television. I started out as a communications major. I always had an interest in writing and film and television growing up. I was in an AV club type thing in high school, but it's not anything I thought I could make a career out of. I was very practical, not even have an Asian parent to tell me to be so. I just thought I should, get a job in business. I actually almost went to culinary school. Interested in psychology at some point. I wanted to be a judge even at some point. Like a lot of people, you think about a lot of possibilities. And my mom didn't push me in any one direction, though she was. I do tell people, I'm like, people have this idea of a white or an American parent being more open and encouraging. And while she was in some ways, in other ways, she was a practical parent. She was like, if you want to do that, fine, but it's going to be really hard and you probably won't make a lot of money for a long time, or this is the problem with that job, or this is the problem with that career. So I wouldn't say she was super like, of course, honey, whatever you want, you'll be great. She wasn't like that. But at the same time, she wasn't exactly like, don't do it. I would never, you should become whatever. So when I got interested in film, television, and writing and all that stuff, when I started taking some electives under the communications hub major, I really loved it. I liked photography. I liked a lot of the things that I was taking part in under that umbrella. And when I said, I think I want to really make a go of this, so my mom was like, I really think you're a strong writer. I really like your writing. And I think that sounds, if that's what you want to do, that sounds like a good idea. And I was like, really? This is the one you were okay with? I was like, great. So I started out the same way a lot of people do, being an assistant on set and working in a smaller market in Philly for just small productions or commercials or local TV. I just worked my way up from there. When it comes to comedy specifically, which, is embedded somewhat in my work at work, is more so outside and for myself. That happened when I got to New York in 2014. The job that I was working at in Philly moved up to New York. And being in New York, I just sort of always wanted to try comedy or just interested in comedy. I loved stand-up, watching stand-up specials. when you could only really watch them on DVDs or HBO at the time. Just when I got to New York, I was like, you know what, this would be so cool to try it. And to try it in New York is huge, is amazing. And so while it's very competitive, there's a lot of access to it. So it's not too bold in that way. So that's how I got into it. I was here and I had an interest in writing, and it seemed like a cool thing to just do my own thing, do my own writing, get my own voice out there. And that's why I got into it.
Now, you were nominated for 2 Emmys, right, for writing on a kids show. Do you want to tell us about that project?
Yeah, it was a live kids show. It was called the Sunny Side Up Show. And I was a producer on it. Actually, there's a lot of roles on it: writing, producing, performing, supervising, producer, director. Like, there was a lot of hats that I wore for that show. And we were nominated twice for outstanding child programming for the Emmys. We were up against Sesame Street and name a bigger, better kids show than Sesame Street. When the nominations came out and our group got nominated, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing to be in the same category. And it wasn't even something where I was expecting us to win or hoping to win. It was more of like, to be name checked in the same space as arguably the founding idea of a kids show, and one that still is the gold standard today, was amazing. And I know people who work for Sesame, and I did at that time. And it was just really cool. So even just going to the Emmys in LA at the time, I was like, it felt so fancy. There was a red carpet. We got great drinks and food. I was like, if this is it, then great. You know what I mean? If I never get nominated for an Emmy again, then okay, I can say I did once or twice now. In my bio, I always say I got nominated for 2 Emmys, but 1 0. And I think that's okay. But yeah, just the whole experience was really cool. And again, not to be cliche, but it was nice just to get recognized and nominated for the work. We did that year. And even if we hadn't been nominated, the work we were doing was really fun and rewarding, and it was changing all the time. And being in a live environment was really cool. And to be able to put stuff like that out at that level, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it was really cool to do. Yeah.
So what was that day like when you heard that what was that moment when you got the news, and were you shocked?
It was at work and they let us know. And I was like, wow. At first I was like, are we going to even get to go? Or are they just going to say like, we're going to send one person? But we got to go and we got to go as a group, and it was really cool. And again, like, I think the management at that time, like, understood the significance and the importance that we were there. For the first one, if we had won, I was the one that was supposed to go up and give the speech. So I had a couple notes down and things I was supposed to say. I was going to slip in a thing there just to thank my mom. We didn't win, but if we had won, I would have been the one that had to go up and represent our group and give the speech, which would have been cool. But yeah, it really was just like, wow, I hope we get to go. And I was more excited just to have a free trip and some free drinks and some hors d'oeuvres and watch and just be there. So I hadn't even considered the thought of winning. It was more of, let's go on a trip. Fun.
Yeah.
That's what it was, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. That was when you were still in Philly?
No, that was in New York. 2 years into New York, I think. Yeah.
Well, congratulations again.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Is writing for kids something that you want to do more of? Or is that like...
I mean, it's not to say that I would never do it again. I think writing for kids is incredibly challenging. I think what's interesting is people think it's not, or when you tell someone you've worked in or work in kids television, there's a little like, oh, that's cute. Oh, my nephew watches, or if they have kids themselves, they might be a little bit more in the know, or they'll say something like, oh my gosh, that show really annoys me, but my kid loves it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. It's for kids television. You're not supposed to necessarily like love it, but people forget these productions are as robust as adult content. And in a way, sometimes more so. Like, animation studios are at the cutting edge, and that's usually starting, at least they touch kids content, obviously. And then when it comes to things that are for preschoolers or kindergartners or early development, as you would call it, it's really important because the message has to be very specific and tailored towards emerging minds. And you can't assume they don't know A is Apple yet. They don't know, they're just getting their feet under them for a lot of these concepts. We always worked with a curriculum consultant that had a background in child education and child psychology. And so we had all these extra things that we had to keep in mind. And also, of course, the idea of keeping things kid and family friendly. All this stuff makes it challenging because you also still have to be entertaining. You still have to be funny. You still have to be visually interesting. for these young minds. So, when people think, oh, but it's not whatever big movie or whatever reality show. And sometimes I'm kind of like, what? Those reality shows are kind of like we shut our brains off, right? They're not exactly the most, and that's no hate against reality shows. I think that they are great too. It's just different. So I don't think there's any reason to assume just because someone's worked in kids television, it's not as legitimate, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have a lot more parameters to work with that constrain your work, actually.
Oh, yeah. And I do think, while in one regard it offers challenges, when you have specific things, you have to keep it does help you stay focused is what I mean.
Yes, absolutely.
It's harder to say like, oh, anything goes. Let's just, I know that sometimes sounds attractive to certain people in terms of a creative space to say, do whatever you want, or there's no limits, stuff like that actually doesn't yield great results. Having some limits is good. You need that focus. Yeah.
Yeah. I make music and I feel the same way. So I do a lot of writing on spec for sync licensing, actually, for movies and TV.
Oh, okay.
And I find it a lot easier to write a song on a brief when someone says, I need a song that talks about this, that sounds about these 3 songs put together and needs to be about this BPM. I'm like, okay. But if you tell me, write anything you want, I'm like, well, there's so many things.
If you tell me anything I want, we'll be spending all this time. Then they'll be like, well, not that. Not that. Like, then give me something. Yeah. Parameters are good. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a difference between having a diverse group of people in a room and giving them equal opportunity to contribute. I'm wondering what your experience was like working on a major network show. Did you feel like everybody had equal chances to contribute, or did you feel like maybe some writers were maybe interrupted more or didn't have as much airspace?
No, I would say that our group was fortunate in the sense that we worked in kind of teams and we rotated around a lot for the nature of the show. So whenever we would pitch things within like a team and a group to another group of producers. And I was on both sides of those tables. I was the one sometime in the past pitching, and then eventually I was on the other side of the table hearing the pitch and approving certain things and giving notes and stuff like that. And in that system, it gave everyone a pretty good voice because it was specifically for the chunk of time, this chunk of creative that they had to tackle. And that really helped things. And our group was a diverse group of producers and viewpoints and things that they felt like they would cover while still having a specific, again, brief to say like, okay, this week we're going to talk about dinosaurs. This week we're going to talk about food. This week we're going to talk about science. So having that starting point and then having people bring their own viewpoint and experiences, whether it came from a diversity mindset or just from how someone might think in general, it was good that helped. Now, obviously in any room that's like a brainstorming room or an open forum thing, there's always going to be people that are just more outspoken than others. And that's their style. For the long time, I was the type of person who I waited till like maybe the middle to the end, like towards the end. I'd hear, more of everyone's things and then give my opinion or my idea. And for a long time, people gave me notes saying like, that's great, but it also seemed like I was being too passive or too quiet. But I think talking to them and talking to other people, that's just a different style. And then I had a manager who appreciated that. They said, I like how you don't jump there right away. And see, all this stuff is subjective. I would say giving space and all that stuff just comes down to people being aware of different styles, different approaches. And just because someone might sound a little bit more quiet, or maybe they like to share their ideas in written form or in a more visual breakdown versus a verbal one. I think it's nice for us to try to think about it that way and not like, oh, we need to learn how to be more loud or jump in there. Maybe not. Right. Maybe everyone should somehow shift their own styles, still be true to themselves, but find the different ways they like to communicate best.
Yeah, that's a great point. Equal contribution, meaning anybody can communicate in the way they prefer.
Yeah, because sometimes that'll happen. Like I've been in meetings, well-intentioned meetings where people, the person leading it, were like, all right, let's go around the table and like go to each person and put them on the spot. And some people who are like, I really don't have an idea this time. I'm so, you know what I mean? Or like, oh God, please don't call it, you know what I mean? But if I ask them, write it out in a brief, or hey, maybe let's do this one-on-one, like they deal better in smaller groups.
Yeah.
I think that's okay. Like if good ideas is what's going to come out of that, then I think it's good.
Yeah. It's a great point to keep in mind for anybody organizing writing rooms or collaborative
Collaborative
projects.
space. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about your show for a bit. Your
Yeah.
comedy show, Case 84, adopted in the USA, is about your story as a transracial, transnational adoptee. And the title really points to how little closure many people like you get. You've contrasted this with the Hollywood portrayals of adoptee narratives. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and about your show?
Yeah. This show has been kind of the culmination of me doing stand-up, me doing some talks like this about my background, about being adopted. And eventually it just came to a point where I felt like I could blend those two together and really kind of focus on not only some of the questions I get as an adoptee, but really why I get the same questions over and over again from people from completely different backgrounds and completely different settings, and why those seem to persist, some of the same questions. And of course, being in media myself and growing up watching movies and TV and understanding how they can shape our thinking and our actions, I just wanted to approach it from that viewpoint of saying, like, here's how I think media influences why I get the same questions, why it's part of our collective understanding or misunderstanding about adoption and adoptees specifically. And then tackling the idea of my own search and journey. And that side of it is the other half of the story that I go into and address as well.
Do you feel like that was a healing process to write and perform this show and create that representation for yourself and others like you?
I think so. It does feel like I'm doing something good, but also fun and engaging, not only for myself. I don't know that's even necessarily the goal I went in with to heal myself. I can't say that's what it was. I went in with the idea that I had been performing and I wanted something longer or more, specific to kind of sink my teeth into. And this felt really good. And it felt like I had all the pieces that I was building to get me to this point. So it felt like a natural step. But yeah, I think the idea of it being a way to heal is nice. And I'll take it,
Yeah, why not? So I'd like to get a little bit more into the difference between your experience and what you've seen from Hollywood. I think that's something that people like me who have not been adopted probably didn't think about until we hear stories like yours, right?
Sure. This isn't just specific to adoption. I think this is specific to a lot of experiences. And I know this because of working in the industry, at least in some regard. You only have so much time to get a message or point across. A lot of times people use shorthand. A lot of times people use what's already been built upon in terms of precedent. So sometimes if that's built on bad reasoning or bad understanding, it perpetuates the same idea. So similar to adoption, we have these ideas about, what adoption looks like, what it feels like, what adoptees should act like, how they should, one small thing is like how adoptees should always feel gratitude towards, their adoption situation, which I think if we really thought for a minute, there's no way any system could be 100% perfect rate of, oh, I adopt a kid and now it's a perfect family and they go off and it's awesome. But somehow within adoption, that seems to be the assumption is that adoption then equals perfect family. That's one thing I seems to come up a lot. And when you build that foundation assumption and then things get stacked on top of that as you're building these shorthand things to get to a longer story or a longer narrative, that's where some misunderstandings, and again, not malicious in intent, but just create this weird feeling among adoptees that they should always just be gracious all the time, which is like impossible.
Yeah, no human is gracious all the time. What are we?
Exactly. Yeah.
What makes a good joke for you? What's your writing process like?
At its simplest terms, do people laugh? And comedy is subjective, of course, but for me, it's like, am I getting a laugh with the joke? There's the debate with people who feel like comedy should make you feel uncomfortable or comedy should do this or should do that. And everyone has their own interpretation of what they like to go to see comedy and what they like to put out as comedy. But at the end of the day, if it truly is to be funny comedy, then I can't think of anything other than to laugh and feel good about it. So I do think when I think of writing a joke or thinking of a good joke is like that's one parameter. And then I guess the other one is, am I getting a good new take on something? Or even if it's a concept people understand, am I finding a way to twist it a little bit? am I bringing my own unique perspective to it? And I think that's what a lot of comedians do is, yes, this might sound like a similar setup, but now I'm bringing in my viewpoint to make it specific to me and make this crowd laugh. So I think that's the other thing I try to think about. Am I really adding something to this topic? And am I being true to myself in terms of how I'm approaching it? If I'm doing another type of style of comedian that really doesn't feel good right to me, and this is what starting out, you're trying to figure out. You're like, am I this kind of comedian? Am I that kind of comedian? When you figure that out, it feels really good. And I think that's what I'd say is like when all those things come together, that to me feels like a good joke.
Yeah. Speaking of different types of comedy, many comedy shows have not aged well. Bits that are plain stereotypes or mocking accents, a lot of those things have been called out as problematic, even when they come from the community that is being made fun of, like Russell Peters, for example. And I think even Trevor Noah said something about the laugh that he gets from the Black community is not the same as the laugh he's getting from the white community and what is implied in that laugh. I'm curious how you navigate that as a writer and comedian.
I've read this before, but like comedies, it falls out of favor the quickest because it is that kind of risky thing that, what's funny today or what's okay today can change. So especially now, in terms of myself, I would never do an accent thing because it doesn't make sense. Like if I did an impression of my mom, I wouldn't be putting on an accent because she's not, she didn't have a Asian accent. So it's not something that I could start to dip into in that way from my perspective. It would feel really weird if I started putting on Asian accents for things in a specific way. I think the hardest thing though to try to consider is every time we feel discomfort towards that, we sort of give semblance to the idea that an accent, that's something bad. Like an accent's just the nature of language and learning languages, and people have accents. This is an accent. What I have right now is an accent. We all have accents in different ways. So I get what you're referring to in terms of certain comedians really playing into these stereotypes to get these laughs, and whether they understand that or not, or whatever their intentions are. Because at the same time, as the more I do Asian American shows and interact with people, the more we try to talk about, oh, this is stereotypical and this is this type of stuff. We do spread ourselves apart. We end up on different sides of a conversation. And I understand why those conversations need to happen. And I do my best for myself to think about it from the perspective of that person that decided that that's what they wanted to cover. And I hope and give them the benefit of the doubt that they're covering it for the reason of like, this is just what they wanted to express. Are there times that I've seen comedians, I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel great. I don't feel like that's helping anything. Of course I have. Trying to take my own taste out of it sometimes. I try to look at it as objectively as possible, but it doesn't always work out. I do my best, but it's trying to see the value and have conversations like this, continue to have conversations like this. And hopefully audiences and people who are watching understand that there's more voices out there. Like, yes, you can have you said Russell Peters, you can have your comedians who want to lean into the stereotypes and do that type of comedy, but hopefully people see other comedians with a different take and a different voice on topics like that.
Yeah. I think the main criticism I've seen regarding the accent specifically is that a lot of people, it reminds them of being mocked for their accent or their parents being mocked for their accent. And it's, triggering, which I could totally understand. But yeah, I think it's a very tricky art form that I do not envy you guys.
No, and you brought, and I think you got at the point before that I think I was trying to get to was that the people who feel triggered by those things because they were teased for it. The part that I hope we would get to is, and I think some people are getting to it, is that we should be pushing back and saying this accent is just an accent. To make fun of it before was wrong, but to hear it now, it should just be what it is. And I think that's the hardest part is like, as we laugh at it now, or as it makes us uncomfortable now, or triggers some sort of trauma that we've had before, it's because it was teased then, but outside of that idea or bubble, it should just be neutral or either looked at like any other accent, like a British accent or whatever. And it would lift that, but it's hard because how do you lift trauma? One person at a time. But that's what I mean to say is that, hopefully we can get to a point Or someone just be like, yeah, I have an accent. So what? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the difference is if the comedian themselves have an accent, nobody has a problem with that. But if
Of
the
course.
comedian is putting on an accent,
Yeah,
making the accent the joke, then that's the
of course.
problem, right? Like you don't have to imitate somebody's accent if your joke was funny in the first place, right?
Sure. And this is really what I say is really only regards to the people of the same background doing the accent. And if they're imitating a parent, for instance,
Yeah.
what I've just said is only relation to that. I don't think a person doing a stereotypical and a mocking accent is right in any sphere. That's that we can draw the line at and say like, yeah, why do you have to be doing this accent? Does it really add to the joke? Is it really that you are just mocking someone's? Then if that's the case, then it's mean spirited. And then
Yeah.
you're a lazy comedian because if that's all you can lean on, then your writing's bad. And that's fine. You can just be a bad writer, a bad comedian. But like, if you're going to get bent out of shape because we call you out on it, then
For
whatever.
sure.
What can you do? Yeah.
Yeah. So you write promos for shows, movies, sports events, and DEI initiatives. With several of our guests, we've talked about we need representation, not just on screen, like in the spotlight, but behind the scenes, in the writing rooms, behind the cameras, every step of the creative process, including marketing. When you're writing promos, have you seen instances where the diversity or lack thereof of the copywriters impacted how effective a campaign was? Like, are there specific examples that jump out that were like, oh my God, this resonated so much more because of the experience that the writers brought? Or on the other end, well, that bombed because clearly nobody had any idea what we were talking about.
You know what? I think the best process is when you have a good amount of voices to craft certain things. Now, obviously, too many voices is not good either, because then it's like, you'll never get to the finish line. That's not just with stuff like this. That's with any project. You need the specific focused amount of voices to get to where you need to go. There's been times where I've had to write things that are a little bit more tricky, and you're trying to get the tone right. You're trying to get the voice right. It's easy to write a movie promo or a thing for a reality show or sport. Like that's in a way, it writes itself. But when it's something like a more serious topic, or if you're covering stuff in relation to DEI initiatives, you're trying to like cover so much ground in a short period of time. And you're always going to miss a little bit. Like you're never going to be able to get the whole human experience of any group down perfectly, but you try your best, you work with people, you do your research. And I think in those situations, at least trying and at least putting something out there, and even if it gets critiqued, then maybe the next one's a little bit better. And that's okay. And I think if we keep being okay with just making steps and then the next one's better and the next one's better, that feels really good. It feels bad when people think this thing has to be the definitive piece, or this thing has to be the thing that says it all. And it's impossible. It's never going to happen. I think that's the side where we all can fall down sometimes. Everything's made from like a bunch of tiny pieces and a bunch of tiny steps. So stuff like this should be exactly the same.
Yeah. And there's so much going on in the world, and it's impossible for any human to be knowledgeable in all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Even me, like I consider myself a pretty progressive person, and I try to keep up with what's going on in the world, but I'm sure I will mess up at some point, and I want people to let me know if I'm saying something terrible.
And that's the whole thing about progress and progressing, is like you're always going to be behind. That's the nature of progress, is that to try to get ahead of it sometimes it's really hard, but progress should always be a little step ahead. And that's the point, is then we'll figure it out. We'll come along.
Yeah. That's just like fear of failure shouldn't prevent us from trying.
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah. Now, for people in entertainment, there's sometimes pressure to both represent Asian Americans correctly and also represent us as more than just a monolith, not like the stereotypical Asian. There's this double pressure of, well, you got to represent the Asians, but also, what does that mean? We're not a monolith. How do you work with that?
I just think we should be open to letting people, and again, just speaking on the Asian American community, we should be to people just being themselves in every way that means. So that means not even putting the idea of this goes against stereotypes or this is stereotypical. If we just let people exist and then let more and more people tell their stories, that would get us to where we need to be. I mean, I understand why people want to call certain things Asian and not and all that stuff. I understand where that comes from because you're trying to like push up and lift the whole thing. So it's good to have categories and boxes. It helps sometimes. But if we truly want to say we're not a monolith, then we have to accept all messages, all things, even if they make us uncomfortable. If we're like, it's not my thing, it doesn't have to be your thing. It's another Asian American's thing. So that's good enough. That should be the point. And yeah, that comes with its limits. Of course, like if they have prejudice and they're putting another group down, then that's not something we need to say is acceptable. But in terms of the idea of just on the simplest of terms, saying if the stereotype is doctors, lawyers, and all that stuff, and we're like, someone who works in the creative field, they're pushing against stereotypes and whatever. It's like, no. I don't want that. I don't want that. I've gone to a lot of things where people are like, you've gone against. I'm like, no, this just happens to be what I like. I didn't try to go against stereotypes. This is just what I was going to get into. I meet an Asian doctor or an Asian lawyer. I'm like so interested in what they do. And I think it's okay for us to all be proud with what we do and not have to put the pressure of saying we are perpetuating stereotypes or we're not perpetuating stereotypes. And I think that's a pressure we don't need to be putting on ourselves. So whatever career you have or you don't have or whatever you're doing should honestly be enough.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What advice do you have for listeners who aspire to have a similar career trajectory as you?
I can't say there's any special ingredient to the idea of getting into film and television in any sort of way. I did it as many people do it. You just start at the bottom and you work your way up. You try to put yourself in the right positions and learn along the way and, approach it in a humble way, but still wanting to be confident yourself, but still come from a place of humility is still, I think, a good way. And I'm not just saying that from an Asian perspective, but I will say this is that there's never been a better time to just try to be creative amongst other things that you do. That's the great thing about creativity is it can be done in anything. Anything can exist on that plane. I can't, just because I go on WebMD and then, I self-diagnose, I can be like, well, I'm being a doctor now. Like, that's not how that works. However, you could sort of be, you can be creative in a lot of different ways. And that kind of works. So that's kind of the beauty of it. So, when I was in school, you needed to like have a real camera. You had to digitize, you had to bring over footage. The process was just like unbelievably like cumbersome to try to, and then even before that, like I was in the digital age, think about people with film, but now you can shoot something on your phone and it looks pretty good. There's so many platforms to post it on. So there's never been a better time to just try these things and try to scratch that itch if that's what you want. And if it's a career that you want to pursue, then great. And just know like, it's like any other business or career. There's going to be a lot of not so glamorous parts of it. There's going to be parts that don't exactly make you feel inspired just because it's creativity or creative field. And in some ways it might make you feel worse because you're like, wait a second, this is creative. I should be feeling great about this because I'm creative. It's just not how it works. That's not how it works. So I think just being ready and being adaptable and being clear with what your intentions are, they always change and that's okay. But just having some idea of like, really, what is it you want to get out of this? Is it because you can't imagine doing anything else but being creative? Then sure, great. If you're just like, man, I'd really kind of like to try, I got this idea, just do it. Then do the idea and do the other stuff that you might be good at or like along the way. And the real thing and the thing you're supposed to be focusing on will probably present itself.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? What are you excited about?
I'm going to try to get to a couple more cities in the U.S. Like I want to get to DC. I want to maybe go back to some places I've been on where AKA this is a adoptee association in San Francisco, which was like a great place that I performed this previous year. And I just want to try to find more places. I've been connecting with adoptee groups in the cities that I go to. And that's been really rewarding and fun. I want to try to get to Minneapolis because there's a big adoptee population out there. And yeah, I'm just going to try to set some more dates in 2024 and get to some more cities. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. Before I let you go, we have our rapid fire section.
Oh,
These
yeah.
are one word or one phrase answers. You don't have to really think about it too much. You
Okay.
don't have to explain, but you can if you want to.
Okay, great. I'm an explainer, so I might explain with some of them.
What's an Asian food that you should like but don't?
I guess, what do you mean by should like? It's something that a lot of people like, or
Yeah, like
just because
maybe
it's an
maybe
Asian.
something that you feel like, yeah, I probably should like this, but I don't.
You know what? I don't often crave bubble tea, but yeah, there's certain ones I like and I'll have it, but it's not like it's the thing. The
Yeah,
other
not
thing
your
I was going
favorite.
to say is the century egg. I think that kind of can divide people too. So that's why I was going to say it's not necessarily that I should like it, but century
Depends who
egg is
you
not.
ask.
Well, that's fair. And my wife loves it. She absolutely loves it. She likes it in kanji, and I just can't do it. I tried, and I just can't do it. Yeah.
What's an Asian food you'll never get tired of?
Dumplings. I could eat dumplings till all kinds. I don't even mind if the skin's too thick. I don't even mind whatever. I'll never get sick of dumplings.
Good choice. Who would play you in a feature film or TV series version of Case 84 adopted in the USA?
Steven Yeun, I would be over the moon flattered if he were to play me. That would be the height of it. Yeah, if Steven Yeun played me, that would be amazing.
Who is your favorite comedian at the moment?
You know what? I've gotten asked this a bunch before. I feel like it's a cheat to say, but he's helped me a lot and he still like posts about my show. It's probably Ronnie Chang. Everyone works hard, but he really feels like he loves it. Like he's out every night, even at the level he's at, he's grinding constantly. The way he helps other Asian American comedians, the way he grinds, and even at the level he's at. Yeah, I just think it's really great that he's at that level and pays it back too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And finally, what's your favorite compliment you've ever gotten about your work?
I would say more recently, and this is one I told and I think about a lot, and it's from the San Francisco adoptee group. They're made up of a lot of Koreans and they're of a similar age as me. They're kind of jaded, which I kind of like. They're jaded in some ways and like optimistic in others, which I think really resonates with me. I did my show out there. A bunch of them came out to support. It was awesome. Finished the show. And a few of them came up to me and they were like, we just want to let you know, we really didn't think this was going to be very good. We just thought it was just going to be another show about adoption and it was going to suck. I think they said we thought it was going to suck. But then they said, actually, it was really good and we really liked it and it really hit a lot of great points. So thank you. And I think that's one of the best compliments I've ever received is we thought it was going to suck, but then it turned out to be really good. And the fact that it came from adoptees and in that way, it was really special.
Yeah, for sure. Way to turn the audience around.
And I love it. I actually do love working from a deficit and I'm okay with it. That's fine by me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. And thank you for all the thoughtful and nuanced questions.
Here are my takeaways for today's episode. Number 1, everyone has an accent. Last week, we talked to Ryan Alexander Holmes about decentering whiteness in our conversations. And this is another way we can decenter whiteness is no longer centering certain types of accents as the default and looking down on others. Why is it that British accents are cool, but Indian accents are not? Maybe accents should just be accents. Number 2, it's better to try, fail, and do a little better next time than not do anything at all. It's okay to make mistakes. And if you make mistakes and get called out, as long as you show that you're willing to learn and do better next time, most people would give you grace for that. Number 3, we don't make choices based on whether it's an Asian thing to do. Breaking the mold or fitting a stereotype is often not the intention driving our choices, but a side effect of just being ourselves. Again, like we talked about last week, what does it mean to be Asian or to look Asian or to do Asian things? We are not a monolith. We can do anything we want. Number 4, when we have limited time to tell a story, we build on existing understandings of things as a shortcut. And sometimes if we build on foundation pieces that aren't solid, that's when we get into trouble. So we just got to make sure that those pieces are solid before we build on them. Number 5, writing for kids is a lot harder than it sounds. There's a lot of work that goes into making those shows family-friendly, educational, and still exciting and fun. And lastly, there's never been a better time to create art. It doesn't have to be your career, but it could be. And if it is what you want to do, just know that, as with any career, not all of it is fun. As a creative myself, I would say most of my time is spent doing non-creative things like administrative tasks, all kinds of organizational stuff that isn't exactly creating your art. but I'm fine with that. So it's up to you to decide. If you want to be creative just for fun, to have an outlet, you can do that and not have to do any of the boring stuff that I'm doing right now. But if you do want to make it a career, just know that that's part of the job and you'll get used to it. As always, links are in the show notes at nuancespod.com. You'll also find the transcript and video of our conversation there. We'll also include Ed's links as well. If you enjoy this episode, let me or Ed know by messaging on social media or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to right now. Next week, our guest is Urjing Kong, a violinist and a professor at the University of Arkansas. We talk about living in the South, assimilating as a survival strategy, participating in global conversations about diversity in the classical world, and her exploration of Black American woman composer Florence Price. Once again, I'm your host Lazu, and I'll be back next week for another nuanced conversation.